I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me felt like a stranger. My marriage to Daniel had become routine, a cycle of polite smiles and empty conversations. Passion? That had faded long ago. I had convinced myself that love was about companionship, not fire, but then he came along, Adrian. It started innocently, a lingering glance, a playful tease. He was my coworker, dangerously charming with his knowing smirk and eyes that saw right through me. The attraction was electric, undeniable. He made me feel alive again. One evening, after a long project meeting, we found ourselves alone in the office. The tension crackled between us like static before a storm. When he brushed a stray strand of hair behind my ear, I shivered. "You deserve more than this," he whispered, his voice laced with unspoken promises. I should have walked away. I should have thought about Daniel. Instead, I let my lips part, a silent invitation. Adrian leaned in, his breath hot against my skin. My heart pounded. I knew in that moment I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. And God help me. I wanted to. Adrian's lips brushed against mine, hesitant yet hungry. My breath hitched, my body frozen between guilt and desire. But when his hands slid around my waist, pulling me closer, the battle was lost. I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his hair as the kiss deepened. He tasted like danger and temptation, the kind that made my heart race and my skin burn. Every rational thought evaporated, leaving only the raw, aching need for something, someone, I had been missing for far too long. He pressed me against the desk, his body firm against mine. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my lips, his voice thick with restraint. I should have pushed him away, gathered my things, and left. But instead, I pulled him closer, answering him with another kiss. His hands explored my curves, teasing, awakening a fire inside me that had been dormant for years. I gasped as his lips found my neck, trailing fire along my skin. Then, reality crashed in. My phone buzzed, Daniel's name flashing across the screen. Guilt twisted in my gut. This was a mistake, or was it? I pulled away, breathless, my lips tingling, from Adrian's kiss. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, my husband, the man I had vowed to love forever. I fumbled to answer, my voice unsteady. "Hey, babe." "Hey." Daniel's voice was warm but distant, like always. "Just checking in. Working late?" I glanced at Adrian, his smirk lazy, his fingers tracing slow circles on my hip. Guilt churned in my stomach, but it wasn't enough to erase the desire pooling low in my belly. "Yeah," I lied. "I'll be home soon." As soon as I hung up, Adrian pulled me back against him. "You're trembling," he murmured against my skin. "This is wrong," I whispered, my breath hitching. His hands gripped my waist, his lips brushing my earlobe. "Then why does it feel so good?" I couldn't answer. My body spoke for me, arching into him, craving more. His fingers slid down, teasing the edge of my blouse, his touch igniting something primal inside me. I should have walked away. I should have gone home. Instead, I let him lift me onto the desk, spreading my legs as he stepped between them, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. The ride home was a blur. My lips were still swollen from Adrian's kisses, my skin tingling where his hands had lingered. Guilt and excitement warred inside me, twisting into something intoxicating. When I stepped through the door, Daniel was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up. "Hey, babe. Long day?" "Yeah," I murmured, shrugging off my coat. My voice felt foreign, my body still humming from Adrian's touch. Daniel didn't notice. He never did. I wanted to scream, to tell him how I had felt like a ghost in my own marriage for years, how Adrian had made me feel seen, wanted, alive. But instead, I swallowed the words, forcing a smile as I sat beside him. He kissed my forehead absent-mindedly. "You smell different." I stiffened. "New perfume." He nodded, already distracted again. My heart pounded as I watched him, searching for a spark of jealousy, suspicion, anything. But there was nothing, and in that moment I knew I could stop this. Confess, beg Daniel to fight for me, or I could fall deeper into Adrian's arms, into the passion I had been craving for so long. The choice should have been simple, but it wasn't. Days passed, but my mind never left Adrian. Every text he sent, every stolen glance at work, every accidental brush of his fingers against mine, it all made the hunger inside me grow. I told myself I could stop, that I wouldn't let it happen again. But the lie tasted sweet, and I swallowed it whole. One evening, as I was leaving work, Adrian was waiting by my car. His smirk was lazy, confident. "You've been avoiding me," he said, stepping closer. I glanced around, my pulse racing. "We can't do this." "But you want to," he countered, his fingers grazing my wrist, sending a shiver up my spine. I exhaled shakily. "It's dangerous." "That's what makes it exciting," he whispered, his lips so close to mine I could feel the heat of his breath. Should have turned away. Instead, I leaned in. His hands slid around my waist, pulling me flush against him. His kiss was slow, deliberate, unraveling my resolve one touch at a time. When I finally pulled back, breathless, I knew there was no turning back. I had stepped over the edge, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stop falling. Deception became my second skin. Each stolen moment with Adrian fed a hunger I had long denied, while every evening with Daniel became a performance. "I have a late meeting," I lied one night, slipping my heels on as Daniel sat on the couch, barely glancing up from his laptop. "Again?" he asked, frowning. My heart pounded, but I forced a smile. "Big project. You know how it is." He nodded, distracted, and I felt a pang of resentment. Would he even notice if I never came home? Adrian was waiting at a hotel downtown. When I stepped inside, his eyes darkened, a slow smirk spreading across his lips. "You came." I swallowed hard. I shouldn't be here. "But you are." His fingers brushed my cheek before trailing down my neck, his touch igniting a fire inside me. He made me forget the guilt, the consequences. With him, I wasn't just Daniel's wife. I was desired. I let him pull me into his arms, losing myself in the reckless passion that consumed us. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing. I was alive. But I was also playing with fire. And deep down, I knew I was going to get burned. The deeper I fell into Adrian's arms, the harder it became to keep my two lives from colliding. At work, I was careful, too careful. No lingering glances, no stolen touches. But the hunger never faded. Every time he walked by, I ached for him. At home, Daniel was starting to notice. "You've been different lately," he said one night as we lay in bed, his voice laced with something unfamiliar, concern. I swallowed hard. "Just stressed." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "You barely talk to me anymore." Guilt twisted inside me. Here was my husband, the man I had once loved with every piece of me, looking for answers. I wasn't ready to give. "I'm just tired," I whispered, forcing a smile, but he wasn't convinced. He studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Okay." I turned away, my heart hammering. Daniel was no fool, and the walls I had so carefully built were beginning to crack. I told myself I could still control this, that I could keep my world from shattering, but deep down I knew the truth. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The first real sign of danger came on a Friday evening. Was in the bathroom, fixing my lipstick before meeting Adrian, when Daniel's voice startled me. "Who's Adrian?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "What?" He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Adrian. You whispered his name in your sleep last night." Blood drained from my face. I scrambled for an answer, for anything that would explain it away. "Oh, Adrian? He's just a guy from work. My team lead. I must have mentioned him before. Daniel didn't blink. You never have. I forced a laugh. It must have been a weird dream. You know how work stress gets in my head? He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. But his eyes told a different story. He didn't believe me. As I left the house, my hands were shaking. The walls were closing in, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something sharper than guilt. Fear. Daniel was watching me now, and I was running out of places to hide. The air in my home felt heavier now, thick with unspoken accusations. Daniel didn't ask any more questions, but his silence was worse than his words. He was watching. Waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. I told myself I could still control this. But I was slipping. One evening, as I lay in bed beside Daniel, my phone vibrated softly under my pillow. My heart jumped. Adrian. I waited until I thought Daniel was asleep before I carefully reached for it. But the moment I unlocked the screen, his voice cut through the dark. Who is it? Panic flared. Just a coworker, I lied, my fingers tightening around the phone. Daniel turned, his gaze cold. Adrian? My breath caught. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. I'm not stupid, you know. You've been distant, sneaking around. You come home smelling different. His voice cracked slightly. Tell me the truth, or I'll find it myself. I stared at him, my throat tight, my mind racing. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. I could lie again, try to salvage what was left, or I could finally face the storm I had created and let it destroy everything. The room felt suffocating, the weight of Daniel's stare pressing down on me. My mind screamed for a way out, a way to fix this. But there was none. Tell me the truth, Daniel said, his voice low, dangerous. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say? That I had found something in Adrian that I had longed for? That I had felt alive in his arms in a way I hadn't in years? Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. My voice cracked. I didn't mean for this to happen. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. But it did. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final. I wanted to beg him to forgive me, to promise that I would fix us. But deep down, I knew there was no coming back from this. Do you love him? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. That was enough. Daniel stood, shaking his head. I'll pack a bag. Watching him walk away, a part of me shattered. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of who I used to be. Desire had consumed me, and now I was left with nothing but regret.